Thanks for joining me here on ClariT Media. This is Alicia. Glad to be with you tonight. I hope you enjoy these episodes of the Bay Area Mental Health Hour and ClariT Conversations. Now, if you're interested in advertising your business, products, or services, reach out to me at aliciamayo430@gmail.com or call me at 707-430-8355. I will be more than happy to talk with you about your goals for your business, your marketing and social media plans, etc. I do it all. That's what I'm here for. I'm a nonprofit 501c3. That means my rates are affordable if you're interested. So again, thank you for joining me here on ClariT Media for ClariT Conversations and the Bay Area Mental Health Hour. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Look for the Bay Area Mental Health Hour or ClariT Media. Thank you. Health Hour on YouTube, Instagram, and on Facebook. You'll find us covering issues surrounding your everyday coping skills and your mental health and wellness. And remember, your mental health matters as much as your physical health. Mommy, don't hurt it. Welcome to ClariT Conversations. I'm Alicia Mayo, the executive producer. I'm here today to talk about what's going on in our world. We've got a lot happening in terms of socio-political history. Joining me today to analyze this time in our history is scholar and political scientist, Dr. James Taylor. He's professor of politics at the University of San Francisco. He's the author of 2 books, Black Nationalism in the United States and California Black Politics. Professor Taylor is also former chair of the Department of Politics at USF, former president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, and the former chair of the American Association. He is also a political correspondent for C-SPAN, CNN, and in my former stomping grounds, KRON 4 Television, the local news leader. I had to add that. Thank you so much, Professor Taylor, for joining me for this talk. Let's first talk about political rights of police, the constitutional rights of police to treat people, particularly Black people, the way they have been. Is there some constitutional law that is creating this idea or this feeling that police officers have that makes them feel like they have the right to shoot and kill people?
Nowhere in the Constitution are police recognized at all. The powers of the state to create courts and things of that sort are in place, but the police in and of themselves are not recognized. In fact, the people in the 4th Amendment, 5th Amendment, 6th Amendment, 8th Amendment, and more, 14th Amendment, are all given protections against state power and the police powers. So if anyone gets protections, it's the whole Bill of Rights that really are a Bill of Liberties. They should be called the Bill of Liberties because it's more of liberties rather than rights, which are negative rights, are protections against the state as opposed to affirmative rights given to you as a citizen. So if you read the Bill of Rights, it says Congress shall make no law The word no turns all of that body of law behind it into negative rights. So we have certain legal protections against state power. And so if anyone has rights in the Constitution, it would be the people. The people are supposed to be secure in their houses in the Fourth Amendment, papers, persons, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. But you have a Supreme Court that effectively has allowed the Fourth Amendment to be interpreted in such a way that Breonna Taylor is dead. It's the Supreme Court that everybody should be aimed at. Everyone should be focused more on the police. They should be focused on the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court basically allows it. The Supreme Court provides the legal pretext to the racism and the violence that we see in the streets because the Supreme Court basically give law enforcement officers a kind of sovereign immunity in the way we see often given to diplomats in terms of diplomatic immunity. But I think people in a democracy shouldn't even allow for limited or even any kind of immunity for law enforcement. Because if the state can give immunity to itself, then it says the state is the final arbiter in society. But in America, the people are supposed to be the final thing. And so the people, not the state, are supposed to have the final say.
I'm following you here. And I think that brings me to the Constitutional Bill of Rights for police officers. Is that something that was created by the state as well?
Yes, and this is largely a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, the Blue Lives Matter movement. Law enforcement basically has tried to create the idea that they are a race. Kid you not. They even have hate crimes now that under Obama. Federal law enforcement now can be victims of hate crimes. In fact, 2 days ago, some young people were charged with hate crimes for doing something to officers that was, superficial, but they were being charged with hate crimes. So law enforcement has gotten itself in America in such a corner that it's like a child crying to the society, begging it to be treated fairly after it's abused its brothers and sisters all around it. It's like the bad child in the family who's beating everybody up, and the parents have come in to check it, and now they want everybody to feel sorry for them for being the abusive child and getting caught. That's what we're seeing right now, and law enforcement needs to fix itself, and it also needs to be fixed externally. And that's where I think it is. And so where we are right now is in a important transition, I think, towards a new era of police reform, but we're just at the very, very beginning. I mean, we're 2 weeks in terms of real reaction to the recent insurgency that has so many different reforms being put in place around the country.
So in your opinion, in a historical perspective, what do you think has happened with police reform or police relations in terms of society from just on a historical perspective, in your opinion?
Yeah, American policing, unfortunately, evolves in 3 different areas in the country in 3 different ways. In the Northeast, it was largely, policing grows out of the watchman system in New England, of the British system. In fact, it was the British police that shot Crispus Attucks to launch off the American Revolution 5 years later. But that's where the American policing system evolves out of the British system, first in Boston, New England. And that's where the first police department in America is, and was considered the best in the world. And then New York came, and New York was considered corrupt. And then you had like Chicago and other cities, and then finally the West Coast cities like Arizona, Phoenix, LA, the West Coast cities emerged. Their policing is all more recent. But most people make a mistake and say policing started out of the slave patrols. That's only regionally true in the South. That's not in the North. There weren't slaves in the North at this point. They came up to the North to hunt fugitives, absolutely, especially in Massachusetts. But be clear that these are very different formations of law enforcement. So people need to be clear. Policing starts out of slave patrols only in the South. In the Northeast, they evolved out of the British watchman system, which focused mostly on humanitarian issues of children and animals being lost. So policing in the Northeast really did cut its teeth being social workers, and maybe they need to go back to that. And then on the West Coast here, more recently in the 1850s, you have what they call the vigilante committees. And the vigilantes are what out of the deputies comitatus. I'm saying it wrong, but out of this whole notion of deputizing the public, the vigilantes the San Francisco Vigilance Committee was the most violent of all. So in all the country where these vigilance committees were forming, because there were no deputies, no court systems, and people deputized the local men within a certain radius, the most vicious of them in history was the San Francisco Vigilance Committee. And what's coincidental in all of this is everybody was Irish. In the West Coast, they were Irish. In the South, they were Protestant Irish. And in the Northeast, they were Catholic Irish, the Kennedy type, Irish. And if you think about law enforcement and policing, there's scholarship that demonstrates that the first tensions between policing and the Black community in 1866, the year after abolition, was a race riot in Memphis, Tennessee, led by the Irish police of Memphis Police Department, the same police department that was implicated in murdering Martin Luther King in that same city in 1968. So Memphis is where the first police on Black race riot happens, but the scholarship shows underneath the uniforms was nothing but Irish racism aimed at Black folk. And that's the history of policing that most people don't want to talk about. Much of it has to do with the Irish, who themselves had been, in fact, the word Irish is the N-word for white people. And this is what people don't realize. The Irish came to America and became hyper-Americans. And if you look at who the most hostile people are politically to Black political issues today, Bill O'Reilly, William F. Buckley, Ronald Reagan, Megyn Kelly, Rupert Murdoch, Sean Hannity. There's this whole Pat Buchanan. Oh my Lord. There's like a long list of vicious anti-Black racism amongst the Irish in American politics in the Republican Party. But that only came after Kennedy. Before that, a lot of that tension was located in cities like Chicago, New York, Roxbury, and Boston, where it seemed to be police versus Blacks, but it was Irish police versus Black. And this is a whole nother complicated dynamic between Blacks and the Irish, because the Irish sold Black people out a long time ago when they were still not even considered white. They decided to sell Black folk out, and policing is the most recent sellout.
You just struck
most people don't know that.
I agree with you on that. You just struck a personal nerve here, because in fact, I have a large percentage of Irish blood in me. And that to me speaks about a love-hate relationship, that we can even look to within our own Black community or within our micro communities, where we have not treated each other right. So right. Yeah, we'll come back to that subject on another time, but thank you so much for bringing that up, because that brings a historical perspective into our data banks, our personal data banks that we can all research on our own. So thank you for that, Professor. What about now these reforms, the police reforms, have they worked? The more recent reforms under the Obama administration that were, kind of developed around 2015, 2016, how they worked?
No, thank you. I was actually on the committee in San Francisco as a part of the community angle to the reforms of the Obama Department of Justice, where it found 282 problems with the San Francisco Police Department. And the department created all of these different committees to address all of these different issues. In San Francisco, unfortunately, the reform all was cold blanketed all of a sudden because of a scandal over in San Francisco related to the Jeff Adachi case that blew everything that SFPD was trying to do in terms of complying with the Obama Justice Department findings out the water. And the unfortunate timing was, as soon as that happened, Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions came in, refusing to enforce the consent decrees, which basically required local police departments like Ferguson and Baltimore and San Francisco and LAPD to comply with federal observers who can, referee their policing. And that was in place. What's really important to know is 92, after the LA riots, until about 2008, when Oscar Grant is killed, you generally have a era of police reform. Of course, there are a number of incidents we can point to, and I'm sure there's research that will show the pattern of shootings in between this period, but none of them got our attention like a Trayvon or a Tamir Rice or or a Oscar Grant, mainly because they were not caught on video. And that's the key. The technology is important for understanding the modern era, because what distinguishes now from, say, Sean Bell in New York being shot 41 times, or Amadou Diallo or Louima, is the video captured. So Oscar's the first captured. And that marks off, I think, an important time period for understanding this entire struggle, this entire movement has been going on. And it has, I think, led to people losing faith in the claims to reform, because law enforcement reformed itself so well between Rodney King and Oscar Grant, with the exception of a few well-known incidents, but they weren't captured. And they didn't get a mass grassroots reaction or even a media reaction because they weren't captured. Oscar was the first captured on video. We've seen others like Tamir Rice and others, the young brother in Cleveland who was at the Walmart shopping and playing with the toy gun section, he was shot. We saw that on video. So the technology, the video, is important to understand why this time era is different than, say, that 2005, 7, going backwards. And what we learned is, even with Rodney King, seeing something on video that seems to be self-evident, law enforcement and their lawyers have found ways to manipulate every movement of law enforcement in an encounter in such a way that they try to define every movement as compliant with policy. And Black folk and many white folk, 800 white folk were arrested in 92 in LA, said no. In fact, LA, the white people started the riot in LA in 92 in Simi Valley. I was there. In Simi Valley, white folks started throwing rocks at the kids first, and then it became a black riot after, but nobody remembers that. But my point is, in between, say, the LA riot reforms, police were doing well. They got out this mentality of the war on drugs warrior and put that cop to death. They did. And then they were trying to revive a new type of policing called guardian. So they were guardians of the community, defenders of the community, not offenders, not warriors attacking, but guardians protecting. And that was up under the Rodney King era reforms at the local level, in PDs across the country. The general tenet of policing, they had reformed themselves. And that's why I think they have to do it again. But what happens is, once Oscar Grant happens, after that, you end up with Mario Woods, Alex Nieto, young Andy Lopez over in Santa Rosa, and then on and on and on. And then we're seeing more and more young people, men and women, walking to be shot, or having been shot on our social media loops. And so what we have been able to determine is all of the reform efforts during that time period, they were effective. But after Obama's attempts to implement reforms and Eric Holder, in addition to what had been done in the immediate Rodney King period, that was a high point of policing, and we just all don't realize it. It was a high point of policing in America. And then after, and again, I'm not blaming Donald Trump. What happened, it starts happening on Obama, and I think it's racism. To be clear, I think that there was a sudden spike in police killings of Blacks during Obama's second term. So I think they were doing it intentionally racistly as a part of a general racist backlash at the law enforcement level, absolutely. But I'm not blaming that on Trump. Trump is an effect, he's a part of that. And then he got in Suffolk County in Long Island and agitated it by telling law enforcement, disregard everything they told you before. When you get them in the car, push them in the head. Don't be so nice, he said. So when the president said that, he gave all of the untrained, poorly trained, maverick law enforcement officers, free reign to be violent. So now we're on the tip end of the Donald Trump era of policing. And again, I'm not blaming him for it. I'm saying a lot of this started with Obama, but it was still the racism about Obama. And this is the racism about Obama, the modern killings, and so is Trump. So it's all in the same bag as a reaction to the first Black president. And that does not mean that I'm saying Obama's policies were Black progressive, because they weren't. It's just the idea that a Black man, even Henry Louis Gates, who is hardly a Black militant or a nationalist, said recently that white America seems to have lost something by having a Black family in the White House. And it did something to them, many of them psychologically. And fortunately, we see many of their children now on the front lines of this protest and civil disobedience. So something very beautiful is happening right now.
Yeah, I think it sounds like those children, and again, looking back at those personal family relationships, my micro relationships within a community, within a family, where people are looking eye to eye, face to face, finally facing these issues that are affecting real lives. I think their children saw the change, the positive changes that came as they were becoming young adults, like you said, during that reform period. And then to see it quickly reverse right before their eyes is shocking. And they've gotten out into the streets to protest, which is great. Okay, so now from that, what kind of reforms do you think must happen and continue to happen? And thank God we have the example of the Obama era.
No, thank you. I think law enforcement itself should reform itself. That's how it has to happen. They have to do it internally. I've worked with the police. I see how they work. We can't do it on the outside. There's this whole, it's almost like a cult, the way law enforcement operates. I don't mean to be derisive, but that's the pressure of membership to comply with the blue line. And that, I think, is a real problem that has to be done. And the revolution has to begin from within. And there are people from within, men, women, gay and straight, black and white, Native American, I've seen them, Asian. They will do the work if the public keeps creating this crisis. The people have to stay in the streets and keep the mess going so that the good people in the bureaucracy can get the power within the bureaucracy. What we're doing in the streets and what our young people are doing in the streets is giving capital to people who've been on the outside trying to get police to be right and do right for 10, 15, 20, for this time period, since it's had this downturn. So really what I'm thinking about is, this might be a tangent, but I'll be quick. In 1941, FDR told Asa Philip Randolph, if you want me to make change, go out and make me do it. FDR, the president, told the Black movement leader, go out and create the environment, the milieu, the crisis, go out and create the protests in the streets so that I can do something. And that's what I think we have to understand is potential here, is that, this can be a great opportunity in that way.
And so if it doesn't happen, what do you imagine it can be like? I mean, realistically.
Yeah,
if the reform does not happen and Donald Trump is reelected for some strange reason.
The problem is that we live in a large country and we're headed to 400 million people. We're technically, in the last census, 310 million. But by the time we get to 2065, 2075, the American public is supposed to be 400 million. The only group that's not growing is whites. Everybody else is exploding. Whites are actually dying in most of America, and that's scary. 33 out of 50 states right now, as we speak, not including the 130 a day that are dying from the opioid crisis. That's not even added to that, or the COVID emergency, which adds that, it makes it even more. So in that sense, the white population, I think, is generally in crisis in America. And what we're seeing is a general reaction to it in terms of our politics. And then the question is, where do we go from here? I think you will see reforms from within law enforcement, really good ones. But again, they can only go so far as the people in the streets give them capital in the chambers and in the offices and in the PDs of America, where people want to change. There's 18,000 police departments, 1.5 million cops in America. There's no way you're going to get them all to do anything once. But you can get a general era of reform like you had between the Rodney King and Oscar Grant killings. Right between there are key murders of Blacks all over the country, again, but it didn't spawn a Black movement reaction like the Oscar Grant and Mario Woods and other locals did, that spawned Black Lives Matter here. That's why you can't start all over America. You start in Oakland first, because that's where Alicia Garza and Black Lives Matter is tweeted from, and that's where Kaepernick is launching his protest from what's happening in Oakland and in San Francisco, and then they're seeing stuff on TV. But the movements that they were reacting to were local people here on the ground who organized to support those families.
Including Stephon Clark in Sacramento. I can't forget Stephon.
Stephon Clark, that's right, in Sacramento, most recently, actually, sadly. And that was quite a tumult up in Sacramento, and the community there is still organized. I think, Alicia, it's really important to understand that whenever these incidents happen, local movements form around that family and those people for justice. And that's kind of the real movement structure right now of the Black movement, not like the old time when King was the prophetic Messiah.
Right.
It's more organic from the bottom up. And we're seeing, even with the violence, that's not something that Black elites will tolerate, right, or support. But the young people said the only way we're going to get America's attention is to set, you know, a police department on fire. You know, the headquarters in Minneapolis, when that police department substation caught on fire, the symbolism of it was that we no longer respect your authority, so now you have to use your power. Much like parents, when our children, you know, don't respect our authority, what do? We resort to power. Get over here right now. And that's law enforcement. They've lost their authority, the respect we had for the badge, those of us that had any respect for it. But now they resort to trying to beat it into us. And I think it was a fatal decision. I think the Black movement should commend itself. It has done a wonderful job of agitating, of bringing these issues to bear. They have America talking seriously about reparations. In my lifetime, I'm old enough to remember it was not a non-starter with Black folk. Now we got 30% white people supporting the idea, and that is an all-time high. And other folk will look at it and say, whoa, only 30% white support it. Well, a political scientist like me says, I remember when it was 9%. So the fact that it's 30% in one lifetime, keep on moving, because it's coming if you keep agitating. And last night I was all over the news and today suggesting that we need to politicize Juneteenth and get behind it for a national holiday. That's what I mean by politicize it, in the same way we did for the Martin Luther King birthday. We need to form a decade-long Black movement beginning now, agitating for a Juneteenth holiday to officially commemorate the end of slavery in America, because nothing else we have on paper, not the Emancipation Proclamation or Gettysburg Address, acknowledges the humanity of Blacks or the right of them to move on after slavery. Lincoln owed us a different kind of statement after the Emancipation Proclamation. That was a military command, or that was an executive order. He owed us an affirmative speech that should be recorded for all history, that talks about the importance of African-American people in America's history and what America owes it permanently for the permanent injury it put on Black people. America can never, ever, 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 ever pay for its sin against Black people. And we are always the proof that they are not who they say they are. And therefore, they must pay reparations permanently from now on. And anybody talking to you about checks is an ignorant person. What I mean by reparations is fundamentally the American government declares a cease war, a cease battle, a détente, an end to war, the 400-year-long war that the American state has been at with Black America since they brought them here in chains. And I know you might think that's exaggerated, but think about this. Name one police department in America that is Black, that polices white people. Not one. I thought Arlington, Virginia was the one place. I looked at that data recently, and that's not even accurate anymore. So white people don't know what it's like to have non-whites policing them. Black people have only lived with mainly with Blacks policing them for most of their history. And what people don't know is policing in America grows up with Black folk moving into the cities around the same time. In the 1860s, as soon as we get free, law enforcement is maturing in America, and it's training itself mainly on the Irish, who are poor amongst the Irish law enforcement and amongst the Italians, but always amongst us, always the Black. The Negro has always been the enemy of the American law enforcement establishment, and I'm not an extremist. I work with SFPD on 2 committees. I'm just telling you what I know as a scholar. This is a fact. This is not hyperbole. John Brown said that slavery was a condition of war, and going into Africa, taking people, was an act of war. We gave this up as a concept as a people with the Civil War, because we pretty much stopped thinking of ourselves as a separate nation within a nation once the Civil War happened, because we then began to think about our citizenship rather than going back to Africa or whatever. So this becomes, I think, important to understand when you think about what's at stake for Black people in all of this, is that African Americans need the police to call off its war on them. They have been at war with us for decades, since the 1860s. In every police department, wherever we are, check, Google. I can show you the research if you want me to. You can look at the book called Something's in the Air, Race, Crime, and Marijuana Legalization by me and 2 other people, and you will see we document how in every county in America, in every state in America, from Hawaii to Vermont, from Florida to Montana, Black people are overrepresented in the prisons in every state in America. The Black prison population is higher than the Black population everywhere in America, and nobody seems to know it, including Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Hawaii. Blacks are overrepresented in prisons compared to their citizenship in the states. So in every state in America, this country as a whole has a whole bunch of Black folk living as a captive nation within a nation. And if America is serious, it will do what the Panthers said in the 10-point plan. It will do what the Black Nation of Islam asked for. Let all the brothers out, not the rapists, not the murderers, not the ones who've done real harm to people, but all of those who deserve a second chance, who made mistakes, who should have been paroled and y'all won't parole them, who should be off probation so he can get or she can get a second chance. She wants to go home to her children and y'all still got her in jail, and then y'all mock us for our family situation. How demonic can it be? You mock our children for not having families the way you think they should be. But then you ignore all the research that says, where are the Black men? Where are the mothers? 1.5 million Black men and women are in chains or under parole or on probation. 4 million altogether. And we think it's just the police. We have to go after the prosecutors in every county. We have to go for the judges. We have to go after the Supreme Court. I'm serious. That's why Trump has to be beat, because the next two up are Democrats. And that's who Trump gets to replace. And this stuff will last
in the Supreme Court.
This will last 70 years if Trump gets 2 more in. So this is life or death, people. If you're playing around, if you're in Cali, this is going to be blue. But you need to send your green money everywhere else in America. You need to be sending money and support and encouraging people in places where you got friends in Georgia, in Kentucky, in Louisiana, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Wisconsin. You got friends in Milwaukee you ain't talked to. Email and say, hey, buddy, what's going on? Haven't talked to you in a few years. I need you to go vote. I did that to my old roommate, a white dude in Denver, Colorado, during the Obama run. I'm like, look, brother, I ain't talked to you in a minute, but I need you to get you and your family to vote for Obama. And I reached out to him, and I assume they did. My point is, this is not about the election being won in 2020. This is about whether America takes a fatal turn to permanent apartheid again. And if I sound ridiculous to you for mentioning apartheid, because you think we don't have such a thing like they had in South Africa, that's because you've been brainwashed not to even recognize that Jim Crow was nothing but apartheid that lasted twice as long as South Africa's did. In fact, South Africa studied our Jim Crow system, just like the Nazis studied not the Weimar Republic, but the Nuremberg laws in order to segregate them, the Jews in Europe and in Germany. So the Nazis and the Afrikaners studied American segregation in order to implement their systems. So we are the mothership of apartheid. If I sound ridiculous that America can't go apartheid again, you have to realize somebody 70 years old, somebody 60 years old right now in America, somebody 59 years old in America right now was under American apartheid in this lifetime. It was called Jim Crow, and that's what Martin Luther King was all about, getting rid of apartheid. So if you think that in 2 generations it can't swing back on us, you are ignoring the history of American presidential politics. It just takes one election, 1876, set Black people back for 90 years. The Hayes-Tilden contest. You can look at other presidential contests where one person coming into power can be fatal. Ronald Reagan in 1980, fatal for Black politics, and reverses everything that King and the movement sought to establish. So be clear, Trump's intention is to erase the Black presidency. The racist reaction he is and represents and embodies is about the Black man and woman and family that was in the White House and not their policy positions. So Donald Trump sees himself as the savior of the white race, the defender of the white faith. And I love it because Black folk have been coming at him all along in every election, every midterm election, every contested election, every open election that they had to fill a seat. Black folk have been coming for Donald Trump like a roaring lion, fiercely. And now their children are out there in the streets, chasing them into bunkers, and black folk impeached Donald Trump. Two of them, two black House managers. That was something that has never happened in history before, that all of us ignored, with Hakeem Jeffries and Val Demings. Two black House managers. Not one was a record, as far as I remember with Clinton. They didn't have one. But or say Johnson back in the 1860s. But to have two black House managers impeach the president, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and then you still got people running around talking about the Congressional Black Caucus ain't doing nothing. Well, the Congressional Black Caucus was calling for the impeachment of Donald Trump on the night he got elected, and with Maxine Waters and Al Green, and everybody thought they were crazy, and even all the little woke Hotep Addos militants now were sleeping on that when Maxine Waters.
Did you say Al Green?
No, yeah, one of the congressmen, Congressman Al Green.
Not the singer Al Green.
He got all the hair on his face, all this dark stuff going on. He got a whole little process.
Well, I wanted you to make that clear, because I know that he is singing. He's the singer, but we also have someone in Congress named Al Green. Well, folks, you guys can look these people up. You can look up their records. You can look up what Professor Taylor is talking about here on your own. I really do appreciate all of your information, Dr. Taylor. I want to cover as much as we can get to in this time that you have to spend with me. So what about the census, and how important is it for us to participate in the census?
It's absolutely important. That's where the money is. That's about money in your neighborhood. That's money for the schools. It's the way the Congress set up the system. Every 10 years, everybody gets counted, congressional seats get redistributed. So if people leave New York and move to Georgia, that population that moves from New York, let's say hypothetically all of it hypothetically moves to New York, then Georgia would get that apportionment of New York seats. So New York could lose 2 seats and Georgia could gain 2 seats if the population of New Yorkers had moved to Georgia in that 10-year period. So every 10 years, America reevaluates its population and where everybody's moving, and wherever the most people are is where the money goes. And this is why it's important for Black and brown people, red people, women people, poor people all over to respond. Stacey Abrams, the sister, is outstanding in this area. She's one of the major leaders. I can't remember her first name, but she's one of the major leaders in trying to educate everyday people of the importance of the census. Rappers need to get involved. Rappers need to get involved. Hip hop needs to get involved and tell young people through public service announcements, families, Black families, put it in Spanish, put it in Korean, put it in different languages, tell people to count, because Alicia, we're at a tipping point of the census. One of my colleagues in San Francisco wrote a book called The Browning of America, Ron Sundstrom. That's where we are.
Say the name again.
Ron Sundstrom, and the book is called The Browning of America. It's a book in philosophy, but he's not looking at demographics as much as he's thinking about what that means. But the demographics of America are changing. In every congressional district right now, the Latina birth rate is outperforming white women birth rates in every county in America. And that was 10 years ago. This is old research, I'm telling you. So there's a real attrition in the white population and an explosion going on amongst others. And the census will tell you where everybody's moving. And then that's where the money goes for schools, for ambulatory services, for fire services, for building inspections. Everything that we need as community that we are saying in this movement needs to come full-fledged, not in some piecemeal affirmative action or welfare policy, but in a total reversal of the relationship of Black people to the state. This is a part of that. This is America doing right by Black people because it's right to do right by them, the same way they've always done right by white people. White people have always had reparations. When they wake up in the day, the American state is on their side. That's how I define reparations. America, right. The government having your back.
Right.
Like FDIC, government backed. And we need Black to be government backed in the same way the government has always backed white. White people have been duped by the American state into thinking that they're really superior, and now that they can see that they're not. And so the American state gave them a false sense of superiority for the past 100 years, and the truth is all coming out because we're not dying, we're growing. Anybody talking about Black genocide is ignorant. We're going from 45 to 75 million before your children reach our age group. So that's where we're headed. Black people are exploding. The only people dying out and experiencing any kind of attrition or genocide is white population. And that's why we have to understand that we're going to see a lot of lurching out, a lot of violence, a lot of desperation, trying to hold on to the old thing. And then you're going to see another energy of young white people that you've seen now say, that's not going to happen. And I've been saying, the thing that Black folk have always needed is some white people to be revolutionary. I'm not talking about the SDS or some group of radicals like hippies and, you know, Castro or in the 60s. I'm saying a generation of white people to be their own revolution. Every generation of white people have failed Black people. Every generation they lie and promise us. They are the generation that will rid us of racism. And we've inherited for now 20 generations of white liars. 20 generations of white liars. And it's time for this generation to come correct, because we're all too intelligent now. We're all too informed. We have the internet. People have access to information. People have knowledge. We have 10,000 Martin Luther Kings now. We have 10,000 Thurgood Marshalls now. We have 10,000 great accountants. We have a Black bourgeoisie and that is far expanded beyond what we had in the 60s. I don't mean to disrespect those people. They were all special. But my point is, we have 10,000 great lawyers now. We have, you know, Thurgood Marshall and Charles Houston and a few others here and there, Constance Baker and a few others here and there. But overall, now that was a cadre of maybe 50 people. I'm saying now we got 25,000 Thurgood Marshalls. Where are they? And why aren't they stepping up to challenge the laws in every district? I'm sorry, Alicia. I think every Black organization, the engineers, the political scientists, the sociologists, the economists, the anthropologists, the health professionals, the law enforcement professionals, we should all be rising up with the young people in the streets in our professions. This has to be a massive, y'all can't go back to normal. We're not letting y'all go back to normal. Black reaction in America. In every office in America, we have to tell them, no, you cannot be who you used to be. Y'all got to change, because we're tired of y'all. And that's the truth. Black people are sick of white people and their violence and their racism. We don't call the police on them. We don't shoot them running down the street in the middle of the day. We don't break into their beds and kill their daughters at night. We don't do the damage that they do to our people. We don't do to them. So I'm just saying, Black people are in a condition, but we don't need to change. Our condition needs to change. White people need to change as a people, and they don't got no condition other than the mental one of being tricked by their own government into thinking that they were naturally superior, when all along it was the reparations that the state was giving them every time they woke up white, and they didn't have to deal with redlining, they didn't have to deal with ghettos, they didn't have to deal with being occupied by the police, they didn't have to deal with bad education, bad food, and all of these kinds of things. So when you start talking about where we are as a people with law enforcement reform, yes, we need to take as much of that money as possible, billions of it, and redistribute it to the neighborhoods and to the schools and to the families. Absolutely. Because listen to this, most of you will think I'm crazy if I say America should give every Black child when he's born $400,000. And that will guarantee that child's life will be beautiful. Guaranteed. Pretty much what white kids get from their mamas and daddies having 100-year advantage over us. They get that 400. But the same, and all of the white people, liberals, conservative, and radicals, the real radicals, oh yeah, the Marxists, they're so full of, you know what? You know, because what the reality is they are willing to only see Black people suffer. They're not willing to see us liberated. They want to join us in solidarity in our Black suffering. But none of them come up with an economic program for our people. They just want to tear down buildings for us and do graffiti. Well, I don't need you, white boy, to tear down 14th and Broadway. I need you to talk to your mama and your daddy and the people in the banking industry and in the financing industry and in the insurance industry to stop discriminating against everyday people like they don't against your people. See, that's what reparations is. Reparations is you wake up white and the government provides protections in everything you do and eat and sleep all day. It has your back. And reparations is that the government was keeping Blacks and Reds and Browns and Asians down while it was artificially overdeveloping the white group. And now the white group is in trouble because the American state can't keep buttressing this sense of superiority because the truth is out.
Let me ask you, this makes me think about the 2008 burst of the bubble, the economic shift when those white dollars all of a sudden like came up missing or short or deficient. Were they actually like robbing themselves, taking from themselves, like grabbing all that they could that really didn't even belong to them, but and was actually, owed to China. Okay, it was money they should have been paying back to China, but instead they decided to rob and take off and go offshore somewhere with the dollars.
Right.
Is that when things really started to shift, when we went through that crisis, that economic
Absolutely.
crisis?
Yeah, this is all a continuation of it. If you want to try to isolate it in some way, that's one thing. But the truth is, it is more of we're only at, what, that was 28. This is and 209, and we're in 2020. So yeah, the ramifications, especially for Black communities, was permanent. People lost permanent wealth, generational wealth, in places like the DMV over in the DC area. A lot of wealth was lost in Black communities around the country, and they were trying to get back on track, but we still are so far behind. We're decades behind average white people in terms of home ownership measurements of wealth alone. Forget private investment and things of that sort. Only the ones that have been lucky enough to understand that game have got into it. But those of us who using the old ways of American middle class and dream, because that's all the dream was. That's all Martin Luther King's dream was to be able to live a middle class life in America, and that was the magic of America.
But it seems like for white America, that economic time was really a time when I for the first time, saw them panicking and worrying. And I said to myself, well, what did y'all do with the money? Like, what did y'all do with the money? Because I sure didn't have it. I'm not worried about it. I'm still poor. But what was it that y'all did with your money to the point where now you are worried, crying out, and coming into our neighborhoods, trying to gentrify, trying to do desperate measures?
Yep. I mean, I remember Leon Panetta's granddaughter was in my son's 5th grade class. And this is Leon Panetta, the head of the CIA and the Defense Department. His granddaughter was going to public school because here where I live in Oakland, up in these hills, is where half the UC systems professors and administrators live, and all these affluent white folk. They could not afford to send their kids to the private schools like these private schools, so they sent them to Montclair or to the good public schools. And that was one of the original outcomes of the '08 crisis. But we really have not gotten back. Only certain industries have come back, but the people, Black wealth, certainly has not recovered. If you look at, say, the Urban League's annual report of the the state of Black America, we went backwards, and that's why I think things like Juneteenth and any kind of cultural expression, the unity of our politics is something we just don't recognize, but we stick together in politics like no other area of life. We stick together in the 90 percentile ratings. Where else do Black people do that? Maybe going to church, but we have the Baptist, Methodist, Seventh-day Adventist churches, right? So even if we're Christians, we're all different kinds. But in politics, the gay Black, the LGBTQ Black, the Black homophobe, well, that's probably not true. They're probably in the conservative party. But generally speaking, every formulation of Black person ideologically on a continuum is represented in this. And that's something that I think that is underappreciated, that Black folk accept the most racist element, unite in politics. And that's only at the national and presidential politics, because we don't do a good job of midterm organizing as a people. And that should be our main strategy. When the white folk ain't paying attention is when the minorities should mobilize, and that would be the midterm elections. When their turnout is low, we should turn out high, and that way we can affect the momentum going into the 2020 election. And that's what Black folk have done right now that nobody's recognizing. Since 2018, since the night Donald Trump lost the popular vote and won the Electoral College, Donald Trump lost by 3 million votes that night. Black men and women were at the tipping point of that. Then on the midterm of November 18, Black folk were at the tipping point of minus 8 million votes for Donald Trump. So minus 11 million votes since Donald Trump became president is a result of Black people. And they're coming at him at every possible way, through violence, through chasing him into a bunker, through impeaching him, through grassroots movements, through rap music, through everything. And when Donald Trump is voted out of office in about 5 months, it will be Black people who saved America. And it will be Black people who saved democracy. Because Black people understand democracy is at stake. And only white people are laughing at Trump still. Only white people think this is a reality TV show that's all fun. We got Corona killing our people disproportionately. And this dude talking about it's over. And it's worse now than it's ever been at any point. And if they forgive him for this in November, then we as a people, I think something's got to give in a real ugly way if they reelect Donald Trump. I think Black folk have to tear this thing down. I do.
Tell me about
Like they did last week. They'll have to do that again in November, because white people have to understand Black people are no longer willing to let you kill us. I don't think there will be another cop. Another cop will not be able to do to another Black man what that cop did to Mr. George. I hope. I know for sure if I see it from now on, if I see that kind of abuse, they're going to have to put me in prison. And most people were afraid of that, but that is how they get away with it. It's citizens, allowing it. And fortunately, in that scene, the citizens are right there confronting them, and they still murdered him, even as a young white woman and Black man were telling him, "You're killing him." So in some ways, you can still have everything right, and at that level, you still have people go across the line.
So what about voter suppression now? Is that going to be something that we need to really be concerned about? And how does voter suppression happen? And I'm thinking, the mail-in ballot is one way to avoid it, and then maybe voting online is another way. I mean, what about voter suppression and alternatives to it?
Yeah, this is going to have to come from Nancy Pelosi and Congress. Throw a lot of money at mail-in voting around the country. Ignore Donald Trump's stupid talk. There's no voter fraud in the national level of government in America. So I think, this voter suppression is basically the only way the Republicans can be competitive. In 2000, they needed the Electoral College. In 2004, they were said to have cheated with Glover, the Secretary of State in Ohio. And then in 2016, Donald Trump lost by 3 million votes in a record defeat. That's what nobody knows, is Hillary Clinton beat him in a record defeat in the popular vote. So I think, Black folk have been doing an outstanding job. And on one part, Alicia, I think we as a people in our own conversations internally in community have to say to each other, like our ancestors did, we got to go buy the same jar. We got to go buy the same jelly beans these devils are going to use at us at the poll and just count them. So you got to outsmart them. And this is what Stacey Abrams is saying, is we have to outperform the racism. We got to turn out in such a massive way that there's no doubt about it. It cannot be close, because this idiot and his minions will try to make more out of it. Like Al Gore punked out in 2000, in my opinion, and gave it to Bush, and that was frustrating. And fortunately, Biden's already saying Donald Trump wants to cheat, and the new book that came out yesterday with Bolton said that Donald Trump is basically begging Chairman Xi in China to help him win. So all of the alarm systems are up for Donald Trump cheating. But we as the people have to understand that we have to outperform the obstruction, outperform the voter suppression. So that means getting our elders out. That means, like we saw recently in Houston, we got to stand out there longer. That's the racism of voting is something that Black people experience every time we vote. We wait 3, 4, 5 hours. There's a documentary by Stacey Abrams about what happened when they stole her election, and it was stolen by Kemp in Georgia, and the ways in which everyday Black people and college campuses too, where young white people will vote, liberally and progressively, are also frustrated with these ID issues and just making it very difficult as opposed to very easy. In the white community, they have too many votes. They be tripping over each other, going to polls right next door to each other. In the African-American community or in the Democratic places, they get dispersed. And that's why it's so important for people to understand that the 2020 election is about everything from the top to the bottom, and changing. The change happens at the bottom with like you were talking about earlier, the census. That also becomes a part of the redistricting and the redrawing of electoral maps. And when it's done unfairly in states, it's called gerrymandering. And in California, that's unconstitutional, and we have remedies for it, like open primaries and voter choice type voting. But to deal with this problem of fraud, the good thing is, Alicia, we have 50 different American systems in 50 different states with 50 different rules, 50 different secretaries of state setting policies. So no one thing can cheat all 50 things. That's the thing. That's the beauty of America, is it's so spread out. And then you got to think about places like Arkansas and Louisiana and Mexico that are poor. They can't even afford, the paper for an old-fashioned pencil and paper ballot. I may be borrowing the paper from the people coming to vote. Can we borrow the paper so y'all can vote? That's how bad they got it. So that, so this kind of thing that the Chinese or the Russians can affect actual vote numbers is not possible, because they would have to be able to do it in 50 different places at the state, federal and county level, it would take an Einstein brain to do it. And they just don't have the wherewithal to do it.
And so what about the Electoral College?
Yeah, the Electoral College right now, it needs to be made obsolete simply by states like Oklahoma and New Hampshire do right now, where they don't give all to the winner. They apportion out who wins. So if you win the Electoral College of New Hampshire, one person gets 1 and the other person gets 2. Let's say the winner gets 2 and the loser gets 1. So the winner doesn't take all. So that way you don't have this kind of, you can do that in all 50 states. And eventually that will mean the Electoral College loses all of its effective power, and you don't even have to try to get it amended. You don't have to try to get it changed by Congress. You can do it at the state legislature level, at the ground level. The problem is you got red America and blue America, so the racist half of it will never cooperate. And that's why we've always been held back as a people, is there are things in place that could bring about our liberation, but we have these demons who, as a people, have always been against us and have never forgiven us for them enslaving us. That's how sick they are. They have never forgiven us for us being enslaved. Because again, whenever white people see us, we remind them of who they are as a people historically. And no matter how much they tell themselves they're Einstein and Marx and someone like Freud and Mozart and Handel and all of these other things that represent high European culture, this right here, this is proof of their crime. This. And as long as they see this, and what you're wearing, they will never be able to be whole until they forgive themselves for their evil. Because we already showed them how they can be forgiven. We forgive them when we should not forgive them. And I think we're at a point now where Black people are saying to America, y'all don't have much more time. We're willing to go down, but we can't keep living like this because, Alicia, the reality is with the browning of America, you cannot have a white supremacist law enforcement system that was cut in the 1860s, mainly on Black people and a non-white majority in the country going forward. And that's what we're gonna have. We're gonna have a non-white majority in about 120 years, but definitely by the next 70. So really by the next 50 and over that next 70, over that, that time period. In about 150 years, Alicia, the census suggests white people will be such a minority that we won't even know that they're here. They might go back to Europe. You might see a famous white person be the last, like Columbus was the first that they say. There might be an un-Columbus one day in about 150 years, because that's what the census is showing us right now. So my point to you is a white supremacist law enforcement apparatus that was created in the 19th century cannot coexist with a Black and non-white majority going forth in the 21st century. One of these things got to give, and Black folk are saying right now, it ain't gonna be us, we're gonna break it. And that's what we're doing right now, and we are gonna break it.
The last subject is a local issue here with, I guess it's intimidation with the nooses that have been placed in the oak trees at Lake Merritt in Oakland. Just talk a little bit about intimidation and how we're going to see it, and how we need to be moving and dealing with the intimidation that will come.
Yeah, I just did a report a minute ago, and apparently these were not white kids that did the ropes. So we're calling them nooses, but they were more like ropes that they were using for some sort of exercise high up in a tree and just left them there. And so people looked up, probably a white person said, ooh, noose, lynching, because Black folk would look up and said, oh, that's just some stupid rope up there. I'm telling you, because even right now, Libby Schaff is all up in arms, calling for a federal investigation. These were Black boys, or at least not white boys, whoever they were mixed race boys. Typical Oakland kids, mixed race is Oakland. And so that's who did this, right? I had an incident at my school last semester where a young man, I can't say too much because I'm on a certain committee, but a young man created a fiercely intense incident where he threatened other students' lives with violence, with guns. And he had been emailing them and harassing them and threatening him and talking about killing them. And then one night he went outside the dorms and was screaming. It was all on video. He was screaming this fierce violence. You niggas come out of here! I want you! Well, it turned out to be a boy who was Black with a white mama, dealing with his own racial chaos in his own tortured self. Much like Candace Owens is a tortured Black girl who got called the dirty nigger, and that's why she's so messed up, she can never heal herself. And so you see these kinds of reactions. So what Libby Schaff and everyone else is reacting to may have been these mixed race boys playing with these ropes, just being weird Oakland in Oakland. But because white folk are hypersensitive now, because they're waking up to these issues, they're reading racism and everything in ways that black folk, they accuse black folk of. So I'm saying to you, the fact that black people did not have massive reaction in marches at the lake yesterday, let you know that they understood there was a nuance to it, that these weren't white boys, this wasn't a race thing, it was a misunderstanding or a false alarm. But then this morning, some idiot racist does indeed hang a large human-sized black-headed mannequin from a tree in Oakland, and this is racism, and now the black community will respond. The black community did not respond to the nooses yesterday, the rope, I'm calling ropes, the ropes yesterday, because although I saw one or two people on Facebook talking about what they were going to do, just people, you know, running their mouths, the black community did not respond. I didn't see any massive response. But we have a precedent. When the so-called barbecue Becky called, that was Oakland. What was the black reaction? They had a 5-1-0 day. They had 30,000 black people come within a week and take over the lake and say, this is still ours. I'm from here. And black folk from Oakland said, you white people, y'all need to take that stuff back to wherever you came from, but this is still ours. And black Oakland marked its territory with the cookout incident. Yesterday, the black community did not react. Only a few people did. Typically, the people that get on and are the spokespersons for everything, you know, just reiterate their importance in speaking to these things. But the reality is the black community, from what I was able to detect, did not go out en masse. But I think now that they had this second thing happen this morning with this mannequin, now the black community is going to make a statement to say, you have no power here. You know, you can try to terrorize people and haunt them and make them afraid, but this is Oakland. And ain't nobody scared of you in Oakland. The Klan was here with 20,000 Klan members met up in these hills where I am right now in the 1900s. Black Oakland ain't scared of these white folk. Go on over to East Oakland if you bad. Go to West Oakland and see what don't come back out. So ain't nobody scared of these white people. They attacked Neil Wilson at the West Oakland BART on the fringes of the white community and the marketplace. But I'd be damned if they had done that in deep Oakland, because that white man would have never made it out. Somebody would have grabbed him. So we've even had one of the young girls of our community here in Oakland, Neil Wilson, stabbed in the neck by a racist, her and her sister. And she was killed in West Oakland. And I want you all never to forget Neil Wilson's name. Neil Wilson should be mentioned with everybody else. She was stabbed in the neck by a racist, and at the West Oakland BART, she and her sister survived. And she was coming from the memorial of her boyfriend who had drowned a year earlier in Memorial Day in a pond here in the Bay Area when she was killed.
Well, Dr. And Professor of USF at the Department of Politics, Dr. James Taylor, thank you so much for joining me here. The shouts for justice and police reform are ringing out in the streets, and our nation, our people continue to gather in solidarity to root out the racism and the injustice. And I appreciate you coming on to talk about it, to be a part of it, and to keep these ideas and subjects and realities at the forefront of all of our lives. Much love and appreciation.
Let's do it again. Let's do it until we are sure that this man is not allowed to get back in office. He needs to be out of the office, and we need to educate people as much as possible, providing information so they can understand this is life or death. This ain't about 2020. This is about America setting black people back another 100 years if he is reelected.
You and I won't let that happen.
That's right. Thank you.
So thank you again, and thank you to all of you for joining us here for another episode of ClariT Conversations. I'm Alicia Mayo. Thank you. Black woman owned. ClariT Media.
Mommy don't hurt her, she can't say she won't. My mini Kimura leave with plenty clothes to
Fashionista, you should be a model, you should be on the catwalk. Fashionista, girl, you're starter, let the scene tonight. Fashionista, you should be a model, you should be on the catwalk. Fashionista, girl, you're starter, let the scene tonight.
Assets of a model, pink gel on nails, a rare of glasses, looking like the old gazelles. Designer bag, matching the Chloe heels, designer dress, designed by
Asali Boutique.
you know they hate her and I'm all jaded.
Our country is in turmoil, and COVID-19 has shut down our schools, leaving our classrooms empty and our students left to learn on their own with no date of returning to the classrooms anytime soon. So what are the students doing? And is the virtual classroom even the answer? And African American male students and their families in particular have yet another hurdle to overcome.
Pardon my absence, we back on the grind. Get in the jump on them, don't fall behind. Breaking down barriers one at a time. I'll give you the game to strengthen your spine. Aiming for greatness, don't settle for fine.
Talking with me today is Chris Chapman, the Executive Director of the African American Male Achievement Program at Oakland Unified School District and the founder of Kingmakers. Hopefully, this ClariT conversation will leave us all a little hope.
Switching. Time in school is now relative. My survival imperative. Intellect is American, African. I'm inheriting.
I'm a king. What is hate for this fire that I bring? What I speak is in my veins, in my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong in the scene. In between. What you mean? What you mean?
Better get back. I'm a king on my throne. I'ma spit that. Go.
Kingmakers of Oakland is a 501c3 organization that works with districts across the country. We posit it's not about fixing Black boys. Black boys are brilliant, beautiful beyond measure. That we have a theory of action, a strategy, a process policy change, recruiting, training, retaining Black male teachers, and work with us around improving educational outcomes. So Kingmakers of Oakland is a not-for-profit organization that works with entire school systems. So we're interested in, growing the portfolio. Right now, it's primarily in the state of California and in the state of Washington. We're also in Guilford County, North Carolina, but looking to grow into the Midwest and deeper into the South. And so we use music because we believe music, every soundtrack or every movement should have a soundtrack. That music really is that life force that helps build will and takes things from a moment to a movement. And so it's another way to engage students, to lift up their voice and reflect back what what are students talking about, and create a new narrative. And so if folks are interested, check us out at kingmakersofoakland.org, and you can learn more about our work. We have a couple of documentary series, access to some of our products and services, but we're here to support Black boys, Black community, and to help school districts change and evolve.
It takes more than just one person to do the kind of work that you've been involved in. And that's really important in this conversation, is to really make it clear about all of the people involved in this work, because it really does take the full community. Full community to make a real difference. And I know that personally. And so that was an important part of our conversation that I really wanted to make clear and get to the bottom of, because I just have not heard that full story. And I think that people can appreciate the fact that there are other people involved. Like who? Can you name some other folks who are still involved?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is definitely involvement internally, like inside the district, and then externally, the community, right? And when those two are working in collaboration and in service of, that's when you accelerate everything. And so over the years, so 5 superintendents, from Tony Smith to Gary Yee to Antoine Wilson to there was a female assisted Devin, and I forget Devin's last name, and then now Kyla Johnson Trammell, who had been working in the district with me that whole time, and now she's the superintendent. From other staff, as my role went from executive director of African American Male Achievement, and then I became the deputy chief of equity, managing African American Male Achievement, African American Female Excellence, Latino Student Achievement, API, other folks along that way, from Brother Mateen Abdul Kwawi, who's the principal at Oakland High, an extraordinary leader on multiple domains, from Anika Hardy, who in the early inception of AMA, helped manage me, helped curate one of the oldest African-American honor rolls and one of the largest in the country based off Oscar Wright. Anika Hardy helped, I would help her in that spirit, work with the Boyds, Dr. Wanda and Clarence Boyd, Brother Oscar Wright, who are elders in our community. Other folks from Sister Giovanni and Sister Berlina and Tanera and Brother Jahi and Brother Bayon and Brother Jerome, and so many teachers, from Brother Kevin, who's now a program manager, graduated from Harvard, graduated from McClymonds High School. So we also tried to identify folks, youth and folks from the neighborhood, and how do we support so they can continue to grow in service of their own community. So the Brother Lamar Hancocks and Jamals and Jason Seals, and to other folks, researchers and elders, Baba Wade Nobles and Arnold Perkins and Sean Ginwright, leaders from philanthropy, right? The California Endowment, Kaiser, Yvette Radford with the Kaiser Foundation has been one of the, over the 10 years, they have funded all 10 years at probably the most significant amount of money. So Kaiser, not only they talk the talk, they walk the walk, and is invested. So, and let alone all the different kings, the students that have come, that are alumni now, actually Obasi, who's now teaching, that's the greatest gift, right? To actually be a student and then to graduate from high school, graduate from college, and come back and teach in the same program. So for me, it's always been about legacy, right? I was interested in working myself out of a job, right? In 10 years, as I'm coming to June, this June, I would have finished 10 years. Then July 1st, I will be, managing just Kingmakers of Oakland, and the legacy is African American Male Achievement, the Office of Equity. Raquel Jimenez, who's now the executive director of Office of Equity and manages the portfolio of the targeted strategies. So all that to say, yeah, now it's in good hands. I mean, it's an extraordinary moment in time, though, with COVID, distance learning, and we knew that schools struggled with engaging children of color when they had them. And now, through distance learning, that's being accelerated. And so just major kudos to all the culture keepers, curators, parents, aunties, mamas, uncles, babas that are standing in that gap, and, you know, working in collaboration with the district, but also working in collaboration with other community partners. So, but yeah, I many times was the face, so to speak, and or, you know, helping curate, maybe the conductor, so to speak, as people were playing beautiful music. Didn't matter if it was the percussions or the string session. And so, but my time has transitioned in 10 years and leaving it in very capable hands.
Right. And so in your opinion now, with all of those great people, all of the great efforts and the continued work, how, as an innovator of American education, in my opinion, you know, because it took a lot of, like you said, orchestrating and bringing people together. I consider you an innovator of American education. Now, how do you think these young men and women of color have fared as a result up till now? What does the data say, and what are some of the things that you are excited about seeing become a new, you know, a new way of educating, and what are your concerns still?
In terms of, well, the data, we had internal data that tracked the power and the efficacy of our department. We had outside evaluators from Tom Dees out of Stanford, did a longitudinal study on our work and showed that we indeed, not only did we decrease chronic absenteeism, increased the cohort graduation rate for Black boys, reduced suspension rates for Black boys, and the residual effect is that actually impacted other groups as well. So we have both qualitative, quantitative data, and I can share even more metrics. We have, multiple publications from We Dare Say Love, written by Dr. Naila Nasir, Dr. Jarvis Givens, respectively, both out of UC Berkeley and Harvard. I have co-authored a number of different publications, from the Harvard Review to the Annenberg Institute. But our work has been documented on multiple levels. And so I think some of the extraordinary institutional wins, one of the probably biggest challenges in public school education right now is a Eurocentric narrative, right? And so we come to understand who we are and whose we are through a Eurocentricity. And that's all love if you're, if you are European. But if you're a person of color, you do not at any point, unless it's Black History Month, or for the few 2, 3, or 4 typical heroes in a particular culture that make it to the history book, for the most part, you don't know who you are. And your orientation of self is based on a Eurocentric language. It's based on a Eurocentric value system. It's based on a Eurocentric pedagogical practice. It's based on a Eurocentric content and context. And that accelerates and privileges some and disadvantages others. And so the fact that we have 7, we wrote, created, and got approved in the state of California, 7 African-centered, Common Core line, academically rigorous courses that not only benefit Black children, but as we prepare all children for a global economy, it's in the best interest of all children to understand African history, Pan-Africanism, to understand that the origins of academia actually come from Africa, right? Versus in America, our orientation around the Black experience, unfortunately, usually comes into being that it starts from slavery. And then our orientation around math and science and history is based on a Eurocentric approach. And so I say this to say, the fact that we have 7 African-centric courses that children can take as a supplement to so in California, you have your A through G graduation requirements. Well, our classes actually meet the A, B, F, and G requirements. So, I mean, that's huge and revolutionary. The fact that we developed the Black male teacher recruitment training and retention pipeline. And we're able to increase the Black male teaching force in Oakland Unified School District over the last 10 years by 25%. That's extraordinary, right? With an attrition rate, 93%. So not only were we recruiting a population when I started that HR was like, Chris, you're not gonna find no Black teachers. There's no Black male teachers that are out there.
Yeah.
Like, you gotta change every Black man has the potential to teach. And in so many different ways, they are teaching. In barbershops, coaching, people that sometimes are even in our own school are engaging our children in ways they know more about that child and that family than their own teacher does. And so all that to say, we were able to do, impact that. You talked about communication. Typically public school education, they function in reactionary communication and crisis communication. They don't communicate in a communication of promise. And or when they do, they've communicated in such a way, they've normalized failure, in particular when it comes to Black children. And so we have a whole set of strategies with work and the opportunity to innovate and lift up all these different ways to communicate from an asset model. African-American male achievement was able to do that. Now as Keymakers of Oakland, we could work with communication departments with school districts to show this is a contextualized way that's strategic to not only engage your Black population, your Black community, and all the community, but to change the narrative from a Eurocentric narrative to a narrative of promise, of diversity, of culture, of context. And so the album, I don't know if you can see that, but this is another way. The fact that the Kings that wrote this album wrote the music to go along with a 10-part documentary. And the topics are me and my partner talking about why Black boys, teaching why Black, institutional racism. So we have the adult dialogue, and then youth listen to it, and then they wrote music based upon what that means to them in their terms. So we're able to use music not only to let our Kings know we hear you, we see you, but we also, when we do our professional development, we're able to take some of these research academic frames, but now contextualize that in the lives of our children. And that's not only powerful for our Kings, but it's also powerful to reflect back to the system on what the system needs to do differently. And so I say all that to say, we have data in both qualitative and quantitative data that substantiates the impact, the strategy for students, for parents, for staff, for central office, for policy, and for the entire city, that this is an effective strategy, but it does take time. I mean,
my conversation with Chris Chapman of the African American Male Achievement Program and Kingmakers of Oakland Unified School District will continue on ClariT Conversations. But please visit our YouTube channel, tap on the notifications bell, make sure you subscribe, and look for those new episodes. Thank you. Black woman owned. ClariT Media. Black woman owned. ClariT Media.